All right, let's talk about Saladin, Salahuddin, the great Muslim hero who annihilated the evil crusaders, and see how he fits into the construct of fake history, which I recently discussed about the Crusades and how fake history works. Basically, fake history, like fake news, is a distortion of the past, and it creates these overarching narratives, and then things in the present are completely misunderstood, intentionally so, because they're connected to this false fake history. So Saladin, who lived in the 12th century and is famous for defeating the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin and for conquering Jerusalem from the Crusaders and expelling them and beating them in many more battles before and after. And he's a great hero, obviously, for that amongst Muslims, but he's also a great hero amongst Westerners and Christians for some reason. So let's discuss that. Anywhere you look, if you watch a movie such as Kingdom of Heaven, but also in books, and this goes all the way back to Sir Walter Scott, Ivanhoe, The Talisman, these types of novels where Saladin figures, and he's presented essentially as a chivalrous knight. And it's also amongst academics and scholars and so forth. Let me give you some examples. In a recent website which a friend sent to me, Christianity.com, it's also about Saladin, and it presents him as magnanimous, merciful, moderate, a paragon of virtue in an era marred by crusader brutality, etc., etc. And then this following quote appears. Saladin shamed the ruthless crusaders by treating the city with kindness and keeping every promise he made to its people when he conquered Jerusalem in 1187. Saladin's courage, justice, and moderation were rare in that age and have won him lasting respect in the West. The Crusaders did not live up to Christ's teachings about love after they had conquered the Middle East. What a different tale the Crusaders might have told if they had at least lived up to Saladin's code, even if they were unable to abide by the law of love. So this sort of thing is common. Here's another quote by one-time esteemed American historian Dana Carleton Munro, died in 1933. So as you can see, this sort of thing goes a while back. This is almost a century now. And he writes, quote, when we contrast with this, the Crusader conquest of Jerusalem before Saladin in 1099, the conduct of Saladin when he captured Jerusalem from the Christians in 1187, we have a striking illustration of the difference between the two civilizations, Muslims and Christians, and realize what the Christians might learn from contact with the Saracens in the Holy Land. Note, might learn, not might have learned, present tense. So what's the big deal? Let Saladin have some fame and glory and be respected in the West. Well, the problem, again, to go back to the topic of fake history, is this. Saladin, according to the Muslim sources, is also portrayed as a very religious and devout Muslim. Now, if he was, according to the Western version, peaceful, moderate, this paragon of virtue and magnanimity, etc., and he was an observant Muslim, then clearly what we have today, radicals, extremists, ISIS, we can't say that they're mainstream Muslims. At best, they're aberrations, because we have fellows like Saladin, who was a sultan, powerful, rich, influential, and he read the Quran regularly and prayed and fasted, as his biographers say. Yet he was magnanimous and merciful, etc., etc. Therefore, we can no longer say or even argue that groups like ISIS and the radicals are representative of mainstream Islam. Again, at best, they're an aberration. Now, back to some real history about Saladin. According, again, to his own biographers, and he's well recorded, he had a whole entourage that followed him around, and they wrote about him. He was every bit like ISIS. In fact, ISIS learned some tactics from Saladin, we can say. The famous choreographed videos of them with Christians, Copts, Ethiopians, and anyone, victims in front of them in the orange jumpsuits where they stand behind them, knock them over, pull their heads back, and carve their heads off. That was straight from Saladin's playbook. At the Battle of Hattin, that's exactly what he did. He allowed various crusaders to ransom themselves because he's magnanimous, but the Knights of the Temple and the Hospital, because they were the most committed crusaders against the jihad, even the Muslims point this out, he gave them one option: convert to Islam and fight for him. They all rejected it, and he had them all paraded in front of his army, and that's where you get the ISIS thing. All these men stood in the back, all these Muslims who were so eager to be given the chance to carve the head off of the infidels, as the sources relay, stood behind them, knocked them over, started carving their heads and screaming Allahu Akbar, and the sources relay that Saladin sat back on his throne with a huge smile. All right. Doesn't sound very moderate to me. Sounds very ISIS-like. Even his taking of Jerusalem, which all these people who like to extol Saladin point to, as I mentioned in those quotes, is not what you think, because he didn't free. They often tell you that the Crusaders in 1099, when they conquered Jerusalem, committed a bloodbath, whereas Saladin peacefully allowed the Christians to withdraw. Not true. He tried to besiege them. He threatened at one point when they offered to surrender. He said, no, I'm going to have you all slaughtered. Then they said, we're going to slaughter all our Muslim captives, destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque, and completely destroy Jerusalem for you. And then he decided, okay, fine, surrender and I'll let you go. But unlike the Western histories, the Muslim histories say that 15,000 of the poorer crusaders who could not ransom themselves, he consigned to slavery. And about 7,000 or 8,000 of those were women and children. And once again, we have to turn to the Muslim eyewitness accounts to see what really happened there. So, for example, Muhammad al-Isfahani, one of Saladin's entourage, who was there at the capitulation of Christian Jerusalem, he wrote, quote, women and children together came to 8,000, and were quickly divided up among us as slaves, bringing a smile to Muslim faces at their lamentation. He thereafter launches into a rather sadomasochistic tirade, extolling the sexual debasement of European women at the hands of Muslim men, a not unfamiliar phenomena today. And he writes, quote, how many well-guarded women were profaned, and miserable women forced to yield themselves, and women who had been kept hidden, meaning nuns, stripped of their modesty, and free women occupied, meaning penetrated, and precious ones used for hard work, and pretty things put to the test, and virgins dishonored, and proud women deflowered, and happy ones made to weep. So that's what really happened in the Arabic chronicles of the time, written by eyewitnesses. Meanwhile, you hear, of course, of the wonderful, magnanimous Saladin. And we can go on and on. Saladin's retirement dream was essentially after he hoped to evict the Crusaders entirely from the Holy Land, and he nearly succeeded, but didn't. And his retirement dream, if he succeeded, was to wage jihad on Christian Europe until, quote, there shall not remain on the face of this earth one infidel in Allah, or I will die in the attempt. Again, more examples. If his quarrel was with the Crusaders about land, let's say, and it wasn't something religious, didn't have religious chauvinism to it, it wasn't about anti-Christianism, why is it the weak and outnumbered and the defenseless Christians who did live under his rule, as the Copts of Egypt, where he was sultan, why are they always being attacked? According to the records, he had them crucified, burned, mauled. Their churches, he had them tarred with dirt. If they were too white, crosses broken, etc., etc. Again, the point of all this isn't to besmirch the popularity of Saladin per se, but rather to give you an example again of how fake history works. Again, to reiterate, he is this magnanimous sultan, the way he's portrayed in the West. Then so-called radical Islam of today has to be seen as, at best, an aberration. Yet in reality, and here's the irony, if you understand the true Saladin, the one that I've just described to you, then actually, when you look at ISIS and these groups, they fit in a perfect continuum that stretches back to Saladin. Indeed, that stretches back to Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam.